All right, welcome back to this fourth lesson on using Flask and SQL Alchemy to connect our applications to a database. In this lesson, we're going to improve on what we did in lesson 3, which is to say we are going to implement a better version of the delete functionality that we had from last time. So at the end of last lesson, we just added this additional handler that would take an ID of a task that was posted from the form, and it would delete it from the database. And so often that might, there's situations in which that might be what we want to do. However, a slightly more rich functionality would be to be able to keep deleted tasks and just have a Boolean flag that told us whether or not they were deleted, and then have our application be able to smartly sift through them and only display non-complete tasks or complete tasks depending on the situation. So let's go ahead and add that functionality to our application. So to do that, we're going to add a new property to our task class. Okay, so this is going to be a Boolean that will indicate whether or not the given task has been completed. So I'm going to call it completed, and I'm going to say it's a db.column. And recall that when we set up a new column for a given class, we need to tell it what data type that column should be. And the data type that I use for Booleans is db.boolean. Perhaps that's not very surprising. A couple of new things about this, though. First thing I want to do is I want to say that when I create a new task in my constructor, let me say self.completed equals false. Another thing you can do is to go ahead and put a default value up here for this. You can say default equals false in the db.column. I'm going to go ahead and leave this in the constructor for now. There's situations in which you might prefer one method over the other. For us, in this case, it's going to be 6 one, half a dozen the other. Okay, so I set self.completed equals false when I create a new task. Okay, so now I have a new column, although I in some sense I don't. If I go to the database, this hasn't actually changed the database structure in any way. This table that holds my tasks still only has 2 columns. If you recall how this table was created, we created it from a Python shell by saying db.createAll, and that command magically, or maybe not so magically, generated all the columns for the task class. So we're going to have to go back and do something similar to regenerate this table so now it includes the completed column. Let's go ahead and bump over to our terminal, and I'm going to, once again, just to reiterate, make sure you're in the virtual environment that you want to be working with for this application, and let me fire up the Python shell. And from here, I'm going to say from main import db and task, as we did before. So we're going to suck in those 2 things from our application. And previously, we did db.createAll in order to create the table that was associated with tasks. So let's try that again and just see if it works. We saw there was some stuff going on here. You could probably figure out exactly what happened to the database by reading all these lines, but an easier way in this case is just to go look at it. Okay, so I refresh the structured tab here, which shows me the schema of my database. In other words, the columns of my database, or columns of my table. And notice I still only have 2 columns. So this is just a lesson in how createAll works. When I do a createAll, that looks for classes for which the tables have not been created yet, and it creates them. Okay, so in this case, our task table already existed, so db.createAll didn't recreate it. It didn't try to update it in any way. It just left it as it is. In order for this update to be pushed through, I'm going to have to basically destroy the task table and then recreate it. So just a note that as we do that, I'm going to lose any data that's part of that. So I'll have another word to say about how you might approach this and not lose data in just 1 second, but let's just go ahead and see how we can recreate our task table. So similar to createAll, there's a db.dropAll. That will drop all of the data in your database, or all the tables in your database. Basically, it'll just wipe them all away. So if I do that, and I come back here and go to my Get It Done database, I have, once again, as when we started, no tables found in the database. However, now if I do db.createAll, I see that my create table query that was run, that now includes a column called completed that is a bool type, and this check down here to ensure that the types of that column are in 0 or 1. Let's come back to the database here. We see now we have a task table once again. If I look at the structure of that table, I see now I have 3 columns, and that one will represent a Boolean as 0 or 1 being false or true. Okay, so there are situations where you wouldn't want to be that sort of brute force because we did lose all of the data in our database. If I go to browse here, there's nothing there, and that's because I destroyed the task table by saying drop all. Now, there are situations where you don't want to do that. That's pretty obvious, right? If you think about developers working on a professional application, if they had to literally destroy the database and delete all of the data in the given database for an application every time they changed one little thing within their model class, that would be pretty ugly, right? So there are ways to do that, and in particular, there's let me just Google it real quick. There's a tool called Flask Migrate that will allow you to incrementally change your databases based on small changes to the model. And so you can use this tool to allow your application to incrementally change the schema for a given table or the structure of a given table without destroying it and recreating it in ways that will preserve the data. We're not going to go into how to use Flask Migrate in this unit. If you go on to the Java or C# tracks in Unit 3, you'll learn how the given frameworks you work with there can use migrations in order to preserve data while they're updating the structure of their tables. But for now, while we're just playing around in our local applications, destroying data and recreating it, not such a big deal, and we want to focus on some other concepts. Okay, so now my tables are updated, so let me go ahead and exit out of the Python shell. And just to reiterate, why did we have to do that? We had to do that because we added a new column to a given class that we want to be stored in a database. So basically, anytime you change a model class, a class that extends db.model, anytime you change such a class by adding or subtracting a column, you're going to have to go in and drop all and create all on that database via the Python shell in order for those changes to be reflected in the database itself. Okay, so now we have this completed flag. Let's go ahead and use it down below to do what we want to do. So down below in the delete task function, we were just deleting the given task from the database every time someone clicked the delete button. Let's improve on that. Let's say that we want task. Now we have this Boolean flag. We can say task.completed equals true and flip that from false to true. And for that to save, just as before, I have to work with the DB session. So I say db.session, and I can still use add, even though task already exists. I can still use db.session.add, and then I can say db.commit. And then that will then commit the changes to that object to the database. Okay, so that will then result in that Boolean flag being flipped for a given task. Let's go ahead and run our application and see how it works. Okay, and if we come here and load our page, since we deleted the data from that table, we no longer have any tasks. Let's just add a couple of quick ones. Okay, so adding those, that hit the same code we did before. There weren't any changes to the code that allowed for the creation of tasks, other than, I guess, perhaps indirectly adding this Boolean flag. Let's actually, yeah, that's a good point. Let's go look at the database and see if these new tasks have that Boolean flag set properly. Okay, so each task, I have 3 tasks now, and the completed column shows values of 0 for each. Here, 0 represents false, 1 will represent true in the MySQL world. And just a note too that when SQL Alchemy pulls data in and out of the database, it will do that conversion of 0 and 1 to true or false for us. So we don't have to worry about that, which is pretty nice. So that's the one change that kind of happened with the code there. Let's go ahead and delete a task though and see what happens when we do that. I'm going to delete task 2. All right, looks like I just probably had a typo. Let me come back and fix that. db.session.commit, is that where the error is? Let's see, down here, db.commit in line 42. That's silly. Let's come back here. There we go, db.commit. Okay, so that should be fixed. Let me come back. And all right, task 2. Try to on deleting task 2. All right, so nothing appeared to happen. Let me just show you that something actually did though. Let's come back here and click on the browse pane again, and notice that that completed flag flipped from 0 to 1 in the task 2 row. Okay, so you might say, well, we deleted it. Why is it still here? Or we marked it as completed. Why is it still in this view? That's because at this point, our query that pulls out tasks to put into that view still just asks for all of them. It's still just asking for all of the tasks. We basically want to add a filter on this query so that it only pulls out the tasks that are not completed. So I can do that by saying task.query and introducing a new intermediate method call, filter by. And I can filter by, and I can give it an attribute and value pair. So I can say filter by completed equals false, and say only give me the tasks for which the completed column or the completed property has the value false. And then I still have to follow this with .all. That says basically give me all of the things that are not completed yet. So we still need the all, but we need it after the filter by. Okay, let's come back and refresh our page and see if we get what we want. So that's great. So notice that task 2 disappeared. Task 2 is still in the database, but since I added that filter, now it's not getting displayed in this main view. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I want to go ahead and add one more piece of functionality to this, which is, you might want to have an application that displayed your uncompleted tasks and your completed tasks in different places. Let's go ahead and just add a display just below here that just shows us the things that have been completed. So let's go ahead and refactor this handler method so that I'm creating something called tasks and then something called completed tasks. And I basically then want to use this same query with the opposite flag here. Okay, and then I again need to pass this into the template. It's kind of a long line. Let me go ahead and break that across here. You can break across lines there in Python to make it more readable. And so now I'm going to pass something called completed tasks, which will be a list of all tasks with the completed flag set to false into the template. Let's go ahead and do something with it in the template. So let's see. Let's go ahead and basically, I want to use basically the same functionality. So let me, well, not all of it. Let's go ahead and write it. That's a little bit lazy. Let's go ahead and put in an HR, just to put a nice visual separator between those. And then I'll put in maybe an H2 tag to say completed. And then below that, I will say something similar here to what I did before. Let me create an unordered list. And then I'll say within that list for task in completed tasks. And then I'll put my end for first, just so I don't forget it. And then now I want to put LIs with the names of those completed tasks. So I could put my LI tag pairs and then use my double curly brace syntax to say task.name once again. And there's no need to put a form here. I mean, I guess you could put a form that, would allow you to uncomplete a task, but that's a little bit much for now. Let's just leave it this way. And let's go see what this looks like. Cool. So now up in the top section, I have tasks that are incomplete. Once I complete them, they are added to the bottom section. All right, so that's pretty cool. You're going to do some stuff that's very similar to this in upcoming studios with Lick List, but that's some good exercising of object relational mapping and working with databases in our Python apps for now. All right, so just to summarize what we did in this lesson, we refactored our application to, rather than delete a row from the database when we wanted to delete a task, we refactored it so that we now have a Boolean flag called completed that will be true or false based on whether the task is completed or not. And we're simply going to update the task and then use filters when we query to make sure that when we're looking at displaying our tasks in the view, we're getting only the tasks that we actually want to get. And just a note too, you could come back to the terminal here. Sorry, I lost my words there. And you can see the queries that are actually run on the database. So notice that last request we had, which just displayed this result set, it generated a couple of queries, and we can see them here. This first one says select the elements of the task where task.completed equals false. And this one ran a query that says where task.completed equals true. So you've learned about how these queries work, and now you actually know what's happening when you use these within your Python applications. So you can use that as a cool tool to map in your brain what's going on between Python world and MySQL world based on the two different worlds that you've learned about in the last couple of weeks. All right, that concludes this first pass at working with our Get It Done application. We'll add some additional functionality for the next class with allowing our application to create users and having user tasks associated with a given user and so forth. So we'll do that next time, but that concludes this lesson. Thanks for tuning in and happy coding.